I met my soulmate my first day of college. I didn't think soulmates existed. I didn't think souls existed. And then I met Jen, and I knew they did. Junior year, my health collapsed, and Jen proposed a depression-defying competition we could conceivably do from bed to finally lose our virginity with the best possible story. Now, the game wasn't just intended as a lifeline to me, though it was that. It was also that Jen was sick of feeling societally body-shamed. I was sick of being self-conscious of my effeminate voice and what was once memorably called my Montgomery Burns body type. So, we decided to utilize our competitive natures and face our deep-seated romantic fears together. Jen succeeded on her very first try. Her story would be hard to beat. Now, the details aren't really mine to share, but to brag a little on her behalf, they involved her French language seduction of a French-Canadian Mountie and his cries of oui, oui, oui during the climactic La Petite Morte. I was happy for her. I was also annoyed. Now I had no choice. I had to go for it. My pride was at stake, and I was still stupidly sick. Trust me, chronic fatigue syndrome is no joke. It all felt impossible. But Jen got it. She got me, and she, as ever, had a plan. She knew that for me to have the courage to be myself, I would ironically need a mask. Thankfully, that weekend was Halloween, and the gay bars had costume contests. So, at Jen's fairy godmother-like suggestion, with friends as Golden Girls Rose and Dorothy, I donned a drawl, cheap wig, long nails, leopard pants, and stuffed my bosom with West Wing t-shirts emblazoned with Stockard Channing and Allison Janney, and transformed Cinderella-like into the fabulous old slut Jen knew was quivering to come out of me. Blanche Devereaux. As Blanche, I felt fun, myself in a new way, less afraid. But once on the dance floor, I froze. What the fuck was she thinking? How was I gonna seduce a gay man in female drag? All of these men were wearing sexy Halloween costumes, half-naked gladiators, sexy Batman, sexy Joker, a rippling sea of muscle and skin. I panic called her. She yelled at me, "You have the bone structure, baby. I love your cheekbones." She had a thing for my bone structure. It was her kind reframing of Mr. Burns, since bones were all I had. I hung up. It was a flip phone. The lights pulsed. The dance floor crowded in, and as the music shifted to Gaga, Poker Face, I broke from the safety of the girls and went prowling. I knew vaguely from the memoirs of Tennessee Williams that gays cruised using a mysterious game of intense, furtive eye contact. So, drunk and deeply ill, more Blanche Dubois than Devereaux, I entered a strange state where I hyper-focused on the eyes of the men dancing around me. A lot of them looked away, understandably. Others returned eye contact, but seemed far away, probably high on videotape cleaner. Then, I locked eyes with someone who seemed alive in the here and now, so I pursued him. He was a beautiful vampire. We started to dance, and then to kiss, and then, laughing, he slipped out Stockard and Allison and tossed them to the floor, lost forever. And that's the moment I think I knew I possessed what they now call gender fluidity. That night, I didn't exactly lose my virginity. The chimes had struck midnight and my spoons were all spent. And the dominant position which the vampire requested of me required more strength than even Blanche possessed. So, after an awkward attempt to please him with my fingers, and then again with fake nails removed, we just cuddled. It was what I really wanted anyway. Reporting the story back, Jen decreed that the, quote, attempted penetration counted, and we magnanimously agreed we were tied and would have to keep playing. Indeed, we never really stopped. During COVID, when I, ironically, felt better, Jen was post-PhD unemployed, then divorced, then once employed, this part's not as fun. Once employed, diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. She was living the book of Job, and yet she kept still feeling guilty about her job, about not being what the world wanted from her all of the time. So I granted her lifeline missions, ones of self-care. Today, you'll sneak home early from work and take a bubble bath. Tonight, you'll cuddle with your cat, Lily, now my cat. Tomorrow, you'll try on a new chemo wig, and we'll watch a Robert Altman movie together over the phone. I told her how my favorite scene in cinema was an adulterous Lily Tomlin in Nashville, alone at the back of the bar, as Keith Carradine sang a promiscuous love song that only Lily knew was a message aimed secretly at her. Last summer, Jen entered hospice. At her bedside, we reminisced over what turned out to be our golden years together, how we pushed each other to face our shame and avoid the worst life regret of never having really lived. But now Jen was the one terrified. She was afraid to be forgotten. She was afraid to die. So with both of us unsure where, if anywhere, she was going, I proposed one more mission, inspired by another golden girl, for Jen to discover what the previous owner of this blazer, Betty White, called the secret, what's after life, and share it, impossibly, back to me. After she died, I joined Jen's family at what was her favorite local restaurant. An Americana band was playing, and it was loud and overstimulating, and I felt disconnected, the way I'd felt for the first 18 years of my life, and I wanted desperately to text my other half under the table. Just then, the band stopped playing and started talking. They were saying they were feeling prematurely old lately and wanted to play something different to celebrate their middle-aged friendship. I felt spookily addressed and turned to give them my full attention. You know, there was a mid-century Hollywood ghost singer, Marnie Nixon, and she gave birth to a musically gifted son, the late Andrew Gold. And he wrote a song that eventually became very famous. And that's the song they sang right then on Andrew Gold's birthday with all of its lesser-known original verses. Travel down the road and back again. Your heart is true, you're a pal and a confidant. And when we die and float away into the night, the Milky Way, you'll hear me call as we ascend. Thank you for being a friend. God only knows, but I'm going to give it to her. Mission accomplished.
So, family, I'm going to tell you the story of when my family, the very first time I came out to my family, as if I was ever in. But I wasn't always this diva that you see before you. There was a time growing up here in Washington in the 60s. I grew up through the riots, through the protests, through the sexual revolution, and that's when I was finding myself. And as I was finding myself, I found a place where we gathered, because during that time, DC was very segregated. The gays gathered one place and the straight folks gathered another place. And it was a place downtown called Franklin Park where the gays gathered, where I found my home. It was right across the street from a wonderful club called the Brass Rail. And the door lady was Adrienne Blackwell. And if she loved you, you could get in. If not, you had to stand on the curb and wait for your girlfriend to come out. So I grew up here in Washington, like I said once before. I had a father who was a cross between G.I. Joe and Rick James. And my mother was a cross between Mother Teresa and Rosa Parks. I still today don't know how the hell they got together. So during that time, my father, because he liked to party and he enjoyed living life to the fullest, and he died very young. And he left my mother to raise five boys: Robert, Raymond, Ronald, Randall, and Russell. All ours. My father liked that word and that letter. And he was Robert. So growing up without a dad was an experience. I had a father, then one day I didn't. But I had a mother who allowed me to be the best that I could be. And during that time, church was our foundation. Growing up in church was we went on Sundays from 6 in the morning to 6 in the evening, 4 services. So baby, come Saturday night, when I found the Queens, that was my form of rebellion. I would come in at the crack of dawn with the hookers, the church ladies, and just in time to go to church. And during that time, it was a wonderful experience. Church was our foundation. And during that time, it was a place where we found solitude. And it was a place that I looked for, and it was a wonderful experience, and it gave me strength, and it gave me hope. And even in church, they allowed me to be the queen that sits before you today. It was a very nurturing space and in a very affirming space, but I still wasn't out. So I thought. So before, how many people are over 50 years old in this room? How many people are over 30 years old in this room? So you might remember a time when we had something called a landline. Before Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Adam for Adam, and Go Fish. When we had one line in the house and 6 people had to share it. And during that time, if you were on the other line, your brother or your mother would pick up the other end and tell you to kindly get the fuck off. So during that time, I was talking to my good Judy. You know, you always have good Judys. And my good Judy was named Tommy. And Tommy was a little skinny queen with a very deep voice. So we're talking, and I said, oh my God, Tommy, I'm gonna meet you down Franklin Park. And before I knew it, my brother was on the other line, and he ran downstairs. And he told me, what the fuck are you doing down Franklin Park? The only people that hang down Franklin Park are faggots, hookers, and people who use drugs. And in that moment, I said, I sell drugs. I sell drugs. I'd rather be a dope dealer or whore opposed to being a homosexual. Because at that time, they were putting us out their house. Families were kicking us out the door, and that was my worst fear, of being beaten and being turned out by my family. So I refused to come out. So at that moment, when my brother was threatened to call and run upstairs and tell my mother, and thank God she was not home. So I called a family meeting. So in that family meeting, I said, we have to all gather. So the Chandler clan gathered like we were reading a will. And my mother sat, and all of my brothers sat in the living room. And I said, Mom, I'm gay. And my mother looked at me, and for what seemed like 2 hours, was 20 seconds of silence. And she said, wait a minute, not in my house. She said, get up, let's take a walk. So we walked around the block, and my mother grabbed my hand. And I said, Mom, what's wrong? She says, well, let me get this in my head. You mean to tell me? And she leaned at me and looked at my face and said, you like men to put their penis in your rectum and you enjoy it? Now, in my mind, I was about to say, bitch. But I had realized that was my mother. So I said, Mother, it's more than that. It's about love. And it's not about sex. And sometimes you fall in love with someone who happens to be the same gender. And if I find someone who loves me that happens to be male, then I'm gonna love him back. So as we walked back, my mother said, are you my son or are you my daughter now? I said, tell him I'm your son and tell him to get over it. So when we went back in the house, my family was gathering, still waiting. So the brother who outed me stood up, called me a motherfucking faggot, said, I hate you and I'm gonna treat you like all those motherfucking faggots in the street. You are dead to me. In my mind, I was going through it, but something said, bitch, ride the storm. Hold, stand still, and if he moves, you knock that motherfucker out. Then my other brother stood up, and he said, wait a minute, our whole father's side is all fucked up, so it's gotta be in the genes. Then my little brother, who actually grew up with my children, who stood there and he cried because he was so lost and he didn't know what to think. And I hugged him and I said, I'm your big brother and you will always love me. And then my oldest brother stood up, who was the young minister at the time in the church we grew up. And when he stood up, the room became very silent. And then he said, you know what? Bitch, be the best faggot you can ever be. And when he said that, I stood up, and in that moment, I said, if the preacher said be the best faggot I can be, and if God said I can be the best faggot I can be, all of you bitches, get in line. Thank you for letting me tell my story. Thank you. God bless.
My heart was pounding because I'd made the decision that I was going to come out to all of my colleagues the following day. I sealed the last of 12 envelopes and I went to bed. But I didn't sleep at all that night. I tossed and turned. I went through my entire life history and I asked myself over and over again, are you sure, Phil? Are you sure? Are you sure? It was the fall of 2000. I had been a physical therapist for just 2 years and I was absolutely loving my work. I was working at an inpatient rehabilitation hospital in Virginia, helping patients recover from strokes and amputations and spinal cord injuries. We were a team of really dedicated practitioners, therapists, doctors, nurses, all just committed to helping people get back to their lives. I had really amazing colleagues, just incredible practitioners who were caring and compassionate, but they didn't really know me because I hadn't really let them into my life yet. They didn't know that I went home and spent hours every night dealing with my own spinal injuries so that I could come and treat patients the next day. They didn't know that I had almost exited the planet a couple years before after being trapped in a very prolonged depression. And most important for this story, they didn't know that I was gay and I was with my very first partner, Jeff. At that point, I had only come out to my parents and my two best friends about 7 months prior. Aside from that, I was still very much in the closet. This was all before September 24th, 2000. On September 24th, 2000, a man walked into a restaurant in Roanoke, Virginia, and asked an employee, "Where's the local gay bar? I want to shoot gay people." He was given an answer to that question, went to that bar, shot 7 people, and killed one of them. Jeff and I were living in that town, Roanoke, Virginia, and I was working in neighboring Salem, Virginia. I should say I was born and raised in New York, and so I had grown up all the way through college in relatively liberal and diverse upstate New York. In contrast, Roanoke and Salem were small, conservative Christian towns. So this shooting gained national attention and created quite the stir in Roanoke, Virginia. There were conversations happening everywhere, including at the hospital where I was working. Because I had masked my sexual orientation for so long, I think the people that knew me just assumed I was straight. So I was privy to a lot of conversations that were happening. People were not censoring what they were saying around me. Now, not all, but a lot of what I was hearing was fear-based, ignorant, or outright homophobic. I can't remember specific comments at this point, 23 years after the fact, but there were enough that I got to the point where I had these stirrings every day of, Phil, you should come out. People just don't know what they don't know. You're an educator, educate. So this was going on for weeks and weeks, and I still wasn't taking any action. After a decade of depression, I was finally in a place where I was super happy. I loved my job. I was in a great relationship with Jeff. Like, life was really good. Did I want to possibly jeopardize all of that by coming out? And then came the tipping point. Jeff is typically a very unrattled individual, and he came home one night and was super unsettled. I had never seen him that anxious and emotional in my life. When he finally settled down, he told me, I was out to lunch today, and I was seated next to a table of 4 men. They were talking about the shooting, saying that all gay people should be lined up and executed. That was my sign from the universe that I had to come out to all of my colleagues and friends. Fully coming out was now non-negotiable. So I made that decision and I commenced with my plan, which was to share with all of my colleagues. I decided to share the letter I had written to my parents, and I put a personalized note in with each of the letters, telling people that I did not want to discuss this at work. I was happy to have conversations outside of work. I went in super early the next morning and delivered those 12 envelopes to empty desks. And I remember walking away from that last desk and feeling simultaneously nauseated and liberated. As the day commenced, I felt lighter and lighter. Thankfully, my colleagues honored my request and didn't bring up any conversation, but I knew that they had all read what I shared with them. A nod here, a smile there, a little bit of extended eye contact, a bit of weirdness mixed in. But for the most part, it was an incredible experience. I left that day and I felt about 100 pounds lighter in my body, and I felt totally at peace. And I think I took my first full relaxed breath in a decade at the end of that day. The following day started really interestingly. I again went into work early, and as I walked into my office, there was a packet on my desk. Okay. I, of course, went in a million negative directions. Is this a termination packet? Is this a suspension because I shared something so deeply personal in a workplace? Is it this? Is it that? I decided no one's here, stop torturing yourself, just open the damn envelope. So I opened the envelope, and in it were about 50 printouts from conservative, evangelical, Christian organizations. And spoiler alert, they did not think homosexuality was a good thing. So normally I would have been really rattled by this, but I was surprisingly unfazed. You have to consider the source, right? This came from my immediate supervisor, who was a young, sheltered, hyper-religious woman who I really think thought was just providing me with constructive education. You know, kind of like I lived under a rock the first 25 years of my life. So, and I remember in my mind just thinking, okay, you're in the South now, bless her heart. Aside from that one really weird experience, all of my other experiences and conversations that I had over the upcoming weeks were transformative. It felt like I stepped out of a prison cell and shackles had fallen off my body. I also could tell that my colleagues were starting to soften and shift in their beliefs, or at least they were becoming more open to having expanded beliefs. And this is when I stepped fully into my true self and never looked back. I have not had a depressive episode in 23 years now. Thank you. Jeff and I are still together celebrating. We celebrate our 25th anniversary this September. And we got married in 2013. We have 2 beautiful adopted children and 1 adopted dog. And life is really fantastic. So, unfortunately, hate crimes and shootings like this still occur. What can the LGBTQIA community do to make a difference? We can be our full, authentic, unapologetic selves and just live amazing lives. We teach through visibility. Thank you.